The swarm's arrival. The universe had always been a vast, mysterious place where countless species rose and fell in the never-ending dance of survival. But none had been as relentless and feared as the Scalari Swarm. These towering insectoid creatures were a force of nature, sweeping across the galaxy like a storm, annihilating anything that stood in their way. They were more than a species, they were a plague. No world, no civilization had ever stood against them. Their vast armies, with millions of biowarriors and world-eating leviathans, moved through the stars like locusts, devouring every planet they encountered. Their bioships, giant and unstoppable, consumed entire worlds in a single gulp, leaving nothing behind but a cold, dead husk. For over 10,000 years, the Scalari had conquered and destroyed. Their unstoppable march across the galaxy had become legend, a tale of despair whispered by the survivors of their campaigns. And yet, when the swarm finally set its sights on human space, there was no fear in the hearts of the people of Earth. There was no trembling, no running away. They had seen the signs, heard the stories, and understood the inevitable was coming. Earth was a relatively young civilization, barely 300 years into its expansion beyond the solar system. Compared to the advanced, ancient races that populated the galaxy, humanity was a fledgling species, barely a blip on the radar of the Council of Elder Races. They had written humanity off. The humans, after all, were nothing more than a fragile young species with no military prowess, no advanced fleets, no weapons to resist the might of the swarm. To the Council, the outcome was inevitable. Humanity would fall, just as every other civilization had fallen. The Scalari would sweep through human space, just as they had done countless times before. But humanity had something that no one expected, something the Scalari had never encountered before. The first battle took place on a minor world on the fringe of human space, Caldera Prime. It was a world that no one had ever really thought of as important. The planet was a mining colony, one of many that dotted the outer reaches of human territory. The people of Caldera were simple folk, miners, engineers, and scientists. They weren't soldiers. They weren't warriors. They had never faced a threat like the Scalari Swarm. When the swarm arrived, it was like a wave of destruction crashing down upon them. The skies darkened with the arrival of millions of insectoid warships. Biowarrior troops as tall as buildings descended from the skies, their claws tearing through the earth as they landed. The massive leviathans, monstrous, world-eating creatures, followed in their wake, ready to consume the planet whole. For the first time, the Scalari had arrived on a world where they could meet no resistance. It seemed like an easy conquest, one more world to fall into their hands. The logical response would have been evacuation. Everyone knew what was coming. The people of Caldera should have fled to the nearby colonies or to Earth itself, where they would be safe from the swarm's wrath. But the humans didn't run. They didn't cower. They didn't hide. Instead, they resisted. And not in any conventional way. Caldera's people were miners. They weren't soldiers, but they were survivors. They had spent their lives digging into the rock of the planet, extracting precious minerals and metals. They knew how to work with their hands. They knew how to make things. And when the Scalari landed, they did what they knew best. They fought with everything they had. The human resistance wasn't organized or well-equipped. There were no trained soldiers, no high-tech weapons, no advanced defense systems. What they had were the tools of their trade. Plasma rifles scavenged from old military supplies, mining equipment repurposed as makeshift weapons, and even sharpened metal rods. But they had one thing the swarm never expected: a will to survive. The people of Caldera fought back with desperation, with passion, with everything they had. They dug trenches, rigged buildings with explosives, and used their knowledge of the terrain to create deadly traps. The resistance was rough and uncoordinated, but it was fierce. They held the swarm back for 12 days. 12 days of unimaginable horror, of bloodshed and sacrifice. They fought from the rooftops, firing whatever weapons they had at the advancing enemy. When they ran out of ammunition, they used knives. When they ran out of knives, they fought with their fists. There was no surrender. There was no retreat. There was only defiance. And then, as the battle raged on, something unexpected happened. The swarm, the unstoppable force of nature, began to feel the sting of resistance. It wasn't supposed to be this way. No species had ever fought back like this. No species had ever lasted this long. The battle for Caldera Prime ended in silence. The swarm overran the final defenses, but the humans never surrendered. There were no prisoners, no mercy. The Scalari had destroyed everything, but they had paid a price. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had bled. They had lost soldiers, they had lost time, and they had lost a world that wasn't supposed to be worth fighting for. The swarm moved on, leaving Caldera Prime behind as nothing more than a smoldering ruin. But something had changed. Something had shifted in the galaxy. The other human colonies had seen what had happened at Caldera. They saw how the people of the planet, with no army, no fleet, no hope, had made the swarm pay for every inch of ground they gained. The other colonies took notice. They realized that humanity wasn't going to fall quietly into the night. They weren't going to surrender without a fight. The message was clear. Humanity would not go down without a war. And so, the flame of defiance spread. The Scalari, who had never known failure, had encountered something they had never expected. Resistance. Something far stronger than their weapons, far more dangerous than their biowarriors. Something that could never be defeated. The indomitable will of humanity. The rising defiance. The battle for Caldera Prime had been a singular, desperate stand. On a world no one cared about, humanity had made its first mark in the annals of the galaxy. To the Scalari Swarm, it had been a minor blip. Another world to consume, another colony to be destroyed in their endless march. But to humanity, it was a moment of awakening, a sign that they were not as fragile and insignificant as the galaxy had believed. The Scalari had underestimated them. And that mistake would come to haunt the swarm in ways they could never have imagined. The news of the resistance on Caldera Prime spread like wildfire throughout human space. The broadcasts came in shaky, incomplete transmissions, the voices of survivors echoing with both grief and pride. It was a story unlike any the galaxy had ever heard before. The people of Caldera Prime weren't soldiers, they weren't warriors. They were just ordinary men and women who had refused to accept their fate. They had chosen to fight back. They had made the swarm pay for every inch of land they had taken. For the first time in human history, the idea of resistance took root in the hearts and minds of billions of people. Earth itself, that cradle of human civilization, had watched in awe as the people of a small colony, untrained and underprepared, had turned the tide against the swarm. But Earth had not just watched. They had learned. And so began humanity's transformation from a fragile species to a force of nature in its own right. The first step was the military. Earth had never needed a true standing army. Humanity had been focused on exploration, on expansion, on reaching out to the stars. But the Scalari had changed everything. The war on Caldera Prime had shown the necessity for unity, for a force that could defend humanity's worlds against the greatest threat it had ever faced. Earth's leaders, now understanding the gravity of the situation, called for the formation of the Earth Defense Coalition, EDC, a united front against the Scalari Swarm. This new coalition would combine the military might of Earth's various colonies, governments, and organizations. The goal was simple: to ensure that every human world, no matter how small, was protected. Every resource, every ounce of humanity's ingenuity, would be poured into the effort to stop the swarm before they reached Earth. The first task was to regroup. The EDC began training soldiers, engineers, and scientists to prepare for the war to come. It wasn't just about firepower. Humanity needed to be smarter than the Scalari. They needed tactics, strategies, and technologies that could level the playing field against the swarm's overwhelming numbers. The lesson from Caldera Prime was clear. The key to survival was not just about brute force. It was about resilience, resourcefulness, and using every advantage. One of the first breakthroughs came from the scientists working on Caldera Prime. They had uncovered a weakness in the Scalari's bioships, an energy signature emitted by their ships when they consumed a planet's resources. It was a faint signal, almost invisible to the naked eye, but it was a crucial discovery. Humanity's engineers worked tirelessly to develop technology that could track and disrupt that signature. It wasn't a game changer, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the military began to form battalions, each of them equipped with the best weapons humanity could produce. The EDC's military command realized that humanity had no chance of matching the swarm's numbers, but they could level the playing field with tactics. They would strike fast, hit hard, and retreat before the swarm had time to regroup. Guerrilla warfare would be their weapon, and humanity's strength would come from the ability to adapt and fight on their terms. Humanity also realized they had something else the swarm didn't: unity. The colonies that had been fractured and divided in the past, each world acting as its own entity, now began to come together. The war for survival transcended old political differences. Earth's leadership, once divided, now stood as one. The EDC was not just an army. It was a symbol of humanity's resolve, a signal to the swarm that the galaxy's most underestimated species was ready to fight. But it wasn't just the soldiers and scientists who were preparing for the inevitable conflict. The entire human population understood the stakes. Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest veteran, was being called upon to do their part. Factories shifted from consumer goods to military supplies. Spaceports were repurposed to build warships. The demand for resources skyrocketed. Humanity was preparing for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and they knew that no world would be left untouched. By the time the swarm launched their second assault, humanity was ready. The second colony to face the Scalari's wrath was Ferris 9, a planet near the outer rim of human space, rich in minerals that the swarm desperately needed. The swarm descended upon Ferris 9 with the same overwhelming force that had decimated Caldera Prime. The difference this time, however, was that the people of Ferris 9 had been preparing for years. As the swarm's ships descended from the skies, the human forces activated their new weaponry. The fighters, made of reinforced alloys, tore through the swarm's ships with precision and speed. The bio-warriors, once unstoppable on the ground, were now facing an army prepared to outsmart and outfight them. Ferris 9's surface became a battleground of explosions, high-tech weaponry, and ingenuity. The EDC's forces fought back with a ferocity the swarm had never anticipated. They planted explosives in the cities, used guerrilla tactics to hit the swarm from every angle, and unleashed every weapon they had. It was a war of attrition, and though Ferris 9 fell to the swarm, the damage inflicted upon the Scalari was unlike anything they had experienced before. They had lost ships, soldiers, and precious time, and so it went. The battle continued to shift, with humanity refusing to accept defeat. Each world that fell to the swarm cost them more than just soldiers and ships. It cost them momentum. The Scalari, for the first time in their long history of conquest, were beginning to feel the sting of a long, drawn-out war. The resistance was alive, and it was growing stronger by the day. As the galaxy watched, a new myth was born, the myth of humanity's defiance. The Scalari Swarm, once thought to be unbeatable, were beginning to falter. But humanity, united, had learned the most important lesson of all. No matter how many battles they lost, no matter how many worlds fell, they would never give up. Their will to survive was far stronger than any enemy, and it would be that will that would lead them to victory. The tide turns. The swarm had never known defeat. For thousands of years, their insectoid forces had marched across the galaxy, swallowing planets, consuming civilizations, and erasing all who stood in their way. To them, the concept of resistance was foreign, and every world they touched was either absorbed into their hive or left as a lifeless shell. But humanity, in all its fragility and determination, had struck a blow. Caldera Prime had been the spark. Ferris 9 had shown the swarm that humanity wasn't just a fleeting threat. They were a problem that could no longer be ignored. And now, the tide was beginning to turn. The EDC, now fully operational, had become a symbol of humanity's resolve. The years of preparation, the building of defenses, and the refining of strategies had begun to show results. Humans had learned quickly, adapting and evolving their tactics to better combat the swarm's overwhelming numbers and brute force. But it wasn't just strategy that made humanity a dangerous foe. It was something deeper, something the swarm had failed to recognize. Humanity's creativity, their ability to adapt and innovate in the face of insurmountable odds. When the swarm descended upon the next target, the human colony of Philo 3, they expected the same result as before. The swarm's forces, a massive fleet of bioships, decimated the outer defense stations, and the shadow of the warships cast a terrifying dark cloud over the planet's surface. Philo 3, however, wasn't a simple mining world like Caldera Prime or Ferris 9. It was a hub of human ingenuity, a world known for its advanced technological research. The humans had been quietly working on a new weapon, something that could change the course of the war: the hyper-accelerator. The hyper-accelerator was a cutting-edge piece of technology designed to disrupt the very core of the swarm's bioships. It used a powerful electromagnetic pulse to interfere with the bioorganic systems that kept the ships alive, essentially shutting them down from within. The weapon had been in development for years, but the resources and expertise needed to build it had been scarce. The destruction on Ferris 9, however, had propelled the EDC into a new phase of mobilization, and Philo 3 became the testing ground for this experimental weapon. The swarm's assault began with the same overwhelming force they had employed on every other world. They struck fast, and they struck hard. The skies of Philo 3 were filled with the horrible sight of Scalari ships descending, their massive frames casting shadows over the surface. Thousands of biowarriors and drone ships began to land, spreading chaos and destruction as they tore through the planet's defenses. But what they didn't know was that the humans were ready. When the first wave of Scalari ships began to land, the hyper-accelerators were activated. The pulse waves sent out by the machines reverberated through the air, unseen and undetectable by the enemy. The first Scalari ships hit the ground with tremendous force, but they didn't land gracefully. Instead, they crashed, their engines short-circuiting as the electromagnetic pulse seized their systems. The swarm's forces were caught off guard as their ships and soldiers froze mid-motion, unable to function. It wasn't the total annihilation that the humans had hoped for, but it was enough. The humans of Philo 3 used this moment of vulnerability to strike back. Fighters, equipped with advanced human weapons and tactics, began to move in from all directions. The swarm's biowarriors, though terrifying in size and strength, were no match for the precision and coordination of human soldiers. The battlefield became a brutal contest of survival as humans, armed with the latest weaponry, tore into the frozen forces of the swarm. The surprise attack turned the tide of the battle. As more and more swarm ships and soldiers were incapacitated by the hyper-accelerators, human forces began to take control. Philo 3's defense systems, upgraded with the latest technology, allowed the humans to retaliate in a way that had been impossible in the past. The once mighty Scalari were suddenly being overwhelmed by the ingenuity of a species they had deemed inferior. But the swarm was not a species that would go down without a fight. They quickly adapted, as they always did, and the battle for Philo 3 turned into a brutal, all-out war. The swarm's leaders ordered reinforcements to land on the planet, sending in wave after wave of biowarriors and heavy artillery. The humans, though, had already fortified their position. They had learned from previous battles that survival wasn't about holding ground. It was about knowing when to push forward and when to retreat. Using the terrain of Philo 3 to their advantage, the humans launched guerrilla strikes against the advancing swarm forces. They worked in small, highly mobile teams, constantly changing positions, striking fast, and vanishing before the swarm could retaliate. In urban areas, they had created traps, explosives rigged to destroy large concentrations of swarm troops. Even when they were outgunned, the humans used their ingenuity to turn the tide in their favor. It was a war of attrition, and the longer the swarm fought, the more they began to realize the human capacity for innovation was not to be underestimated. Philo 3 was no longer just a battle, it was a statement. The Scalari had underestimated humanity, believing them to be weak, primitive, and ill-prepared. But now, humanity had shown the swarm something they had never encountered before: the power of human determination combined with their ability to adapt and create. By the time the battle came to a close, the swarm had suffered heavy losses. Hundreds of their bioships had been incapacitated, and thousands of their soldiers lay dead. The humans, though bruised and battered, had held their ground. They had forced the swarm into retreat for the first time in history, and that victory sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The news of Philo 3's success spread quickly, reaching every corner of human space. Colonies that had once been on the brink of surrender were now emboldened by the victory. They understood that humanity's strength didn't come from its ability to fight in the traditional sense. It came from their resourcefulness, their creativity, and their unyielding will to survive. The tide was turning. As humanity watched the Scalari retreat, their ships limping away from the planet, they knew this was only the beginning. The swarm had taken their worlds, their cities, and their people, but now humanity was ready to take back everything the Scalari had stolen. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the swarm had seen what it was like to lose, and that would make all the difference in the battles to come. With every victory, with every struggle, humanity proved to the galaxy that their resilience, their innovation, and their spirit could overcome even the greatest of odds. The swarm may have been the galaxy's greatest conquerors, but they had never faced humanity, never faced the sheer force of will that would one day bring them to their knees.